When a billionaire's curious son meets a playful waitress, a simple lunch turns into a life-changing adventure full of laughter, lessons, and unexpected opportunities. Richard Sterling, one of the wealthiest men in the country, was known for his sharp business sense, his fast cars, and his luxurious lifestyle. He had mansions in multiple cities, private jets, and even a yacht that seemed to be a small island on its own. But despite all his wealth, Richard's most important possession was not anything money could buy. It was his 8-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was a lively boy, full of curiosity, energy, and the kind of innocence that made the world seem brighter. Richard often found himself wondering how he could balance his busy life with being a good father. Today, he had decided to take a small step. He wanted to spend a few hours alone with Ethan without phones, emails, or meetings interfering. It was a sunny afternoon, and the city streets were busy with people hurrying to work, running errands, or meeting friends. Richard and Ethan arrived at a well-known upscale restaurant that had a reputation for excellent food and a warm, family-friendly atmosphere. While it was not the kind of place most billionaires frequented casually, Richard liked it because it had a relaxed vibe. Ethan loved it for its desserts and the little play area it had in the corner. Richard parked his sleek black luxury SUV near the entrance. Ethan jumped out of the car with his usual excitement, tugging at his father's hand as they walked toward the restaurant. Inside, the restaurant was bustling with people. Waiters and waitresses moved quickly, balancing trays of food, drinks, and desserts. The smell of freshly baked bread mixed with the aroma of sauces and spices, making the air rich and appetizing. Richard led Ethan to a cozy corner table by the window. From there, he could see the street outside and also watch the small playground area, where a few children were laughing and playing as they settled down. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it briefly and considered ignoring it, reminding himself that today was about Ethan, but business calls had a way of catching him at the most inconvenient times. He quickly silenced the phone and promised himself he would check it later. Ethan, on the other hand, was already scanning the room for something interesting. That's when he noticed her. The new waitress was unlike any other Ethan had seen before. Her name tag read Leela, and she had a playful sparkle in her eyes. She wasn't the kind of person who just walked around taking orders. She seemed to notice the little things, like the way a child's shoe untied itself or how someone struggled with a menu. Ethan's eyes widened as he watched her move from table to table. There was something unusual about her, something fun and adventurous. He nudged his father lightly. "Dad, look at that lady. She's kind of funny," Ethan whispered, trying not to laugh. Richard glanced up briefly, noticing Lila's presence. She had dark hair tied back in a ponytail and a bright smile that made her face light up. Richard didn't pay too much attention at first. Billionaires like him were used to seeing a lot of people every day, and most of them didn't stand out. But there was something about the way she interacted with the customers, especially with children, that caught his attention. She was kind, playful, and not in a fake way. Her energy seemed genuine. Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. Leaned closer to his father, speaking in a conspiratorial tone. "Dad, I think she wants to play a game with me." Richard raised an eyebrow. "A game?" he asked, trying to sound interested but also cautious. He wasn't sure if he should let his son interact with a stranger in such a busy place. "Yes," Ethan said, nodding eagerly. "She knows a secret game." Before Richard could respond, Ethan waved subtly at Lila. She noticed immediately and crouched down slightly, smiling. Then, to Richard's surprise, she slowly slid under the table where Ethan was sitting. For a moment, Richard couldn't believe what he was seeing. A waitress was hiding under his table with his son. Richard stayed quiet, his eyes wide with curiosity. He had seen many unusual things in his life, but this was new. He could hear Ethan giggling softly and Lila whispering something back. Richard leaned back in his chair, trying to understand what was happening without interrupting. He didn't want to scare Ethan or embarrass the waitress, but he couldn't help being fascinated by the scene unfolding in front of him from under the table. Lila's voice was gentle and playful as she whispered instructions to Ethan, who nodded eagerly and followed them. Richard couldn't hear everything, but he could see the joy on his son's face. Ethan was fully engaged, his eyes sparkling with excitement. And Richard realized that this small moment was more important than any business deal he could be handling at. That very moment, Richard watched as Lila carefully adjusted herself to stay hidden. She moved with surprising grace, her energy and focus entirely on keeping Ethan entertained. Richard began to notice little things about her, how she seemed to understand the child's imagination, how she reacted quickly to unexpected movements, and how she made Ethan feel like the most important person in the world. Even from under the table, she managed to create a sense of adventure, turning a simple lunch into a mini exploration for Ethan. Other diners glanced over occasionally, some curious, some amused. A few raised their eyebrows, clearly wondering why the waitress was under a table, but no one seemed offended. Richard, meanwhile, found himself smiling quietly. He had spent his life surrounded by people who often acted out of obligation, duty, or fear of money. But Lila's actions were genuine, spontaneous, and brave in a small but meaningful way. She was not pretending to care. She genuinely cared about making Ethan happy. As the minutes passed, Richard began to feel a mix of amusement and admiration. He had never thought much about waitstaff beyond the basic interactions of ordering and paying. But Lila was changing his perspective. Her creativity and playfulness reminded him of the kind of joy he used to feel as a child, before the world of money and responsibility had made him serious almost all the time. Ethan, meanwhile, was completely immersed. He whispered something excitedly, and Lila responded with a playful gesture. Richard could see his son's laughter bubbling up, a pure sound that filled the space around them. For Richard, this moment became more than just lunch. It became a window into understanding his son better, seeing what made him happy and appreciating the small but meaningful interactions that could make a day unforgettable. Time seemed to slow down. Richard put his phone away completely, telling himself that no business call could compete with this. He watched as Lila and Ethan shared secret smiles and gestures, a little world hidden under the table that belonged only to them. Richard realized he was learning something valuable from a waitress hiding under a table sometimes. Joy came from unexpected places, and sometimes the most important connections happened in small, unplanned moments. Eventually, the waitress carefully crawled back out from under the table. Richard couldn't help but notice the grace and care in her movements. She smiled at Ethan, who looked at her with admiration, and Richard felt a surge of respect for her. She had not only entertained his son, but had done so with intelligence, creativity, and courage, even if it was just a small game at a restaurant table. Richard leaned back, finally speaking in a soft voice, almost to himself. Well, that's something I didn't expect today. Ethan laughed and looked up at his father. She's really fun, Dad. Can she stay and play more? Richard smiled, a rare, genuine smile that not many people ever got to see. I think she's busy with work, buddy. We can come back another time. As the lunch continued, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Lila. She was just a waitress, just a person doing her job, yet she had managed to create a memory for his son that he knew would last a lifetime. And more than that, she had reminded him of the simple joys in life, the kind of joy that money couldn't buy, no matter how much you had. For the rest of the meal, Richard paid attention to Ethan's laughter, the way he asked questions, and the little jokes he shared with Lila. Richard realized that this lunch, which he had thought would be just a casual outing, had turned into something far more meaningful. He had glimpsed the magic of imagination, the importance of human connection, and the unexpected ways people could bring happiness into your life by the time they left the restaurant. Richard had made a silent promise to himself. He would pay more attention to these small moments. He would encourage Ethan's curiosity and imagination. And he would remember the lesson he had learned today from a young, playful waitress named Leela, who hid under a table and reminded a billionaire father. That joy could be found anywhere if you only took the time to notice it. After the playful moment under the table, Richard Sterling found himself even more curious about the young waitress. Lila, he couldn't help but watch as she moved gracefully between tables, taking orders and balancing trays with ease. But there was something different about her. She didn't rush, she didn't seem stressed, she had a way of making everyone around her feel comfortable. especially Ethan. Richard had seen many waitstaff in his life, but none had this kind of presence. Lila was not just doing her job. She was creating little moments of magic for the people around her. Ethan, still buzzing with excitement from the secret game under the table, leaned closer to his father. "Dad, she knows more games. She said there's a secret story we can play if we want." Richard raised an eyebrow. "A secret story? And how does one play a secret story?" he asked, half teasing, half curious. Ethan giggled. "She says I have to listen carefully and then I have to imagine it. She'll hide and act like a part of the story too." Richard smiled quietly. He felt a strange mix of amusement and wonder. It wasn't often that he saw his son so completely absorbed by someone other than himself. But what surprised him more was that he wanted to see this unfold. He wanted to understand what kind of person Lila really was, and why she had such a strong effect on Ethan. As Ethan and Lila began their whispered game, Richard noticed how carefully Lila listened to his son. She nodded, laughed softly at his jokes, and even exaggerated little movements under the table to make the story more exciting. Richard could see Ethan's eyes widen with each new twist, his small hands gesturing as he described the scenes he imagined. Richard realized that this was not just a game. It was a form of teaching, creativity, connection all wrapped together. Other diners occasionally glanced at the table, some with curiosity, some with amusement. A couple of mothers nearby smiled at Ethan, recognizing the joy of children interacting. With kind adults, Richard paid little attention to their glances. He was too focused on watching Lila and Ethan. There was something captivating about how naturally she interacted with his son. She didn't seem to be trying to impress him, and yet, in a way she did. As the game continued, Richard began to notice small details about Lila that impressed him. She had a quiet confidence that made it seem like nothing could faze her. Ethan accidentally knocked over a napkin. She quickly leaned down to pick it up without making a big deal, smiling reassuringly at him. When another child nearby cried over a dropped toy, Lila offered a kind word without missing a beat in her interaction with Ethan. Richard realized that she was not only playful and clever, but also genuinely compassionate. She was someone who understood people, who could read emotions and respond in ways that made others feel safe and valued. Ethan whispered something to her under the table, and Lila responded with a playful nod before moving her hands in a way that made Ethan giggle uncontrollably. Richard found himself smiling again, remembering how he used to laugh like that when he was Ethan's age. There was something contagious about the joy the two of them shared. Something that reminded him of simplicity had consumed his life. Richard's mind wandered for a moment to his own childhood. He had grown up surrounded by luxury, but had rarely experienced moments of true playfulness or connection with adults outside his family. Seeing Lila interact with Ethan made him realize what he had missed. There was value in imagination, in spontaneity, and in moments that didn't have a purpose other than bringing happiness. And now, here was a young woman he barely knew, teaching his son those very lessons in her own quiet, playful way. As the lunch continued, Richard decided to observe more closely. He noticed how Lila had a natural ability to adapt. When Ethan suddenly changed the story and made her a dragon instead of a princess, she didn't hesitate. She shifted her movements, whispered new lines, and even made playful roaring sounds from under the table. Ethan laughed so hard that he almost fell off his chair. Richard's eyes widened at her creativity. Most people, when asked to improvise, would have frozen or struggled. But Lila handled the situation effortlessly. Richard leaned back and reflected. Here was a person who, despite working in a job many might consider ordinary, had extraordinary skills, creativity, empathy, and the ability to engage and inspire. He realized that sometimes the most remarkable people were not those with fancy titles or degrees, but those who could make a difference in small, unexpected ways. As the game under the table continued, Ethan suddenly whispered urgently to Lila, pointing at something across the room. Lila quickly crouched and nodded. Richard followed their gaze and noticed a small accident at a nearby table. Our child had spilled juice all over the floor, and the mother was frantically trying to clean it up. Without hesitation, Lila slid out from under the table and ran over. She grabbed a napkin, cleaned up the spill, and reassured the mother with a calm smile. Then, just as quickly, she returned to Ethan, crouching back under the table to continue the story. Richard was impressed. Most adults would have been flustered by the spill or simply waited for someone else to handle it. But Lila's actions were smooth, confident, and kind. She had an uncanny ability to balance her responsibilities while still making time to engage fully with Ethan. Richard began to see her as more than just a playful waitress. She was intelligent, quick-thinking, and genuinely caring qualities he valued highly in people he wanted to be around. Ethan whispered another twist to the story, and Lila responded immediately, using exaggerated gestures and funny noises that had the boy in stitches. Richard realized that this moment was teaching Ethan something important: the joy of creativity, the value of friendship, and the beauty of thinking outside the box. He felt grateful that Lila had entered their lives, even if just for a short lunch. Time passed quickly, and soon the meal arrived. Richard watched as Lila gracefully balanced the dishes and placed them on the table. Ethan's eyes lit up at the sight of his favorite food, and Lila knelt down just enough to explain what each dish was, turning it into another part of their imaginative story. Richard noticed the small things she did. She remembered Ethan's preferences. She encouraged him to try something new. She did it all without making him feel pressured as they began to eat. Richard found himself thinking about how rare it was to meet someone like Lila. She had charm, intelligence, and kindness, but she also had an energy that was contagious. Even watching her work made him feel lighter, happier, and more connected to his son. He realized that today's lunch was no longer just about feeding his son or taking a break from work. It had become a lesson in observing, appreciating, and learning from people in unexpected places. Ethan, completely absorbed in the story and the game, didn't notice his father's thoughtful gaze. He whispered to Lila again, asking for the next part of the story, and she nodded eagerly. From under the table, she improvised new twists and turns, creating a world where Ethan was the hero, and she was a magical companion, guiding him through adventures. Richard watched silently, fascinated by the creativity flowing between them. At one point, Ethan accidentally knocked over a small bread basket. Lila reacted immediately, crouching down and picking up the pieces while reassuring him with a warm smile. Richard felt a surge of respect. Most people in her position might have scolded a child or acted impatiently, but she handled everything with grace and patience. He realized that her kindness was genuine and that she truly cared about Ethan's happiness. Richard's thoughts wandered again. He reflected on his own busy life, filled with meetings, contracts, and constant pressure. Realized that he had forgotten the value of small moments like these, moments of connection, imagination, and joy. Lila, in her simple, playful way, had reminded him of what was truly important. He felt a quiet sense of gratitude for her presence. As the lunch continued, Richard began to interact more subtly. He asked Ethan to introduce him to Lila, and the boy eagerly complied. "Dad, this is Lila. She's my secret game friend." Richard smiled warmly. "It's nice to meet you, Lila. I can see you're very good at your job, and very good at making my son laugh." Lila blushed slightly, but smiled confidently. "Thank you, sir. I just like to make the kids happy. It's fun to see them smile." Richard nodded, feeling a deep sense of appreciation. He realized that Lila's talent wasn't just in serving food or playing games. It was in making people feel valued and joyful, a skill that few possessed and many overlooked. By the end of lunch, Richard had learned something important. He had discovered a person who, despite her simple job as a waitress, had qualities that were rare and remarkable. She had creativity, kindness, patience, and intelligence, all wrapped in a playful, adventurous spirit. And most importantly, she had made his son's day unforgettable. As they left the restaurant, Richard made a mental note to pay closer attention to people like Lila. He realized that life was full of hidden gems, people who could inspire, teach, and bring joy in the most unexpected ways. Lila had reminded him that true value didn't come from money or status, but from the way someone made others feel. And for Richard, that was a lesson worth remembering forever. The lunch was going smoothly. Ethan and Lila were still deep in their secret game, laughing quietly under the table. Richard Sterling watched them with a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and admiration. He had never seen his son so completely absorbed in something, and he had never been so impressed by a waitress. Lila's energy and creativity had turned an ordinary restaurant visit into something extraordinary. Richard thought about how rare it was to meet people who could bring so much joy to others, especially in such unexpected ways. Just as Richard leaned back to savor a sip of his drink, a sudden noise broke the calm. A glass of water tipped over. On the edge of the table, it teetered for a moment, then crashed to the floor, sending water spilling across the restaurant. The noise was loud enough to turn a few heads. Ethan froze, his wide eyes looking at Lila under the table. "Oh no," he whispered, panic in his voice. Lila, quick as ever, popped out from under the table. "Don't worry, Ethan. It's okay," she said, kneeling down to quickly grab napkins. She moved with surprising speed and precision, dabbing at the water before it could spread too far. Richard noticed how calm she stayed, even as a few diners glanced at the spill with mild annoyance. She didn't panic. She didn't scold Ethan. Instead, she turned the moment into another chance for fun. Ethan giggled nervously. "I didn't mean to," he said. Lila smiled warmly. "It's okay. Accidents happen. Look, now we can make a game out of it," she said, picking up a straw from the table and pretending it was a magic wand. She twirled it over the wet floor, making sound effects as though she were casting a spell to clean the water. Ethan's fear vanished instantly, started laughing, so hard that other diners nearby smiled. Drawn by the boy's joy, Richard sat back in his chair, watching silently, fascinated. Most adults would have reacted with irritation, embarrassment, or frustration. But Lila had turned a potential disaster into a fun, imaginative moment. She was teaching his son that mistakes were not the end of the world, that creativity could solve problems, and that laughter could make even the most stressful moments better. Richard realized that this was the kind of skill that money could never buy, the ability to remain calm, positive, and resourceful under pressure. The waitress continued her playful act, and soon the spill was magically gone, as if by a real spell. Ethan clapped his hands, delighted. "You did it, Lila. You saved the day." Lila winked. "Of course, Ethan. And you helped too." Richard chuckled quietly. He couldn't help but admire how naturally Lila handled everything. There was no hesitation, no pretension. She was confident, clever, and kind all at once, and the way she connected with his son without forcing it, without acting, was extraordinary. Richard realized he had underestimated the power of simple human connection. Lila was showing him that joy and trust could be built in moments as small as a spilled glass of water, as they settled back into the story game. Lila whispered a new twist to Ethan, making him roar with laughter. Richard noticed that she had a unique way of paying attention to every little detail. She noticed how Ethan's eyes widened when a certain part of the story was mentioned, how his hands fidgeted with excitement, and how his imagination soared. She adapted the story in real time, responding to Ethan's reactions and keeping him completely engaged. Richard leaned back in his chair, thinking about how rare it was to see someone so talented and so kind at the same time. In his world of wealth and business, people often tried to impress or manipulate to get what they wanted. But Lila was different. She didn't need to prove herself, and she didn't act in any way to gain favor. She was genuine, playful, and smart. Just as Richard was reflecting on all this, another twist happened. A child at a nearby table, fascinated by Ethan and Lila's laughter, reached out and accidentally knocked over a plate of food. The sound of the crash echoed across the restaurant, drawing more attention than the water spill had. Richard's first instinct was to feel a little annoyance on behalf of the other diners, but he quickly saw Lila spring into action. She moved gracefully, picking up the plate and quietly reassuring the child, and without missing a beat, she returned to Ethan continued the story game, crouching under the table once again. Richard was amazed. She had handled two incidents calmly, skillfully, and with a sense of humor that turned both situations into playful moments instead of disasters. Richard realized he had learned something important from watching her life. It was unpredictable, full of accidents and unexpected challenges. But how one responded to those challenges mattered far more than the challenge itself. Lila's creativity, patience, and kindness had turned potential chaos into joy. And Richard knew that these were qualities that could change lives. Not just for his son, but for everyone around her. Ethan, fully immersed in the story, suddenly whispered urgently to Lila. She nodded and crouched under the table again, listening carefully. Richard noticed the way she focused entirely on Ethan, tuning out everything else around her, the noise, the diners, the chaos. She was fully present in the moment, giving Ethan her complete attention. Richard reflected that this kind of focus was rare. Most adults, even the best parents, were distracted by their own worries or tasks. But Lila was completely there, fully engaged with his son, and it made a world of difference. The story they created under the table became even more adventurous. Lila acted as multiple characters, her voice changing slightly for each one, her hands and movements making Ethan laugh uncontrollably. Richard watched, mesmerized by the way she could improvise so well, maintaining the story's flow while also handling the real-life chaos of the restaurant. At one point, Ethan made a sudden request for Lila to act like a dragon chasing a treasure. Without hesitation, she slid out from under the table, crouched low, and moved with a playful, exaggerated sneak toward an empty chair. She growled softly, flapped her arms, and then whispered a secret clue to Ethan, who erupted into laughter. Richard couldn't believe how effortlessly she adapted to his son's imagination. Other diners started noticing and smiling. Few even commented on the playful scene, but Lila handled their attention gracefully, never breaking her focus on Ethan. Richard was struck by how well she balanced everything: creativity, patience, and social grace all at once. He realized that Lila's skills weren't just for entertaining children. They were the kind of human qualities that could influence people in any setting. As the lunch continued, Richard began to feel a deep sense of admiration and respect. For Lila, she had turned what could have been a stressful outing into a magical experience. She had taught Ethan lessons about creativity, problem-solving, patience, and fun, all without seeming like she was teaching anything at all. Richard realized that sometimes the most important lessons in life came from the most unexpected places. Ethan, now fully energized and completely caught up in the story, whispered a final twist. Lila responded immediately, creating a clever plotline where Ethan's character had to outsmart a tricky puzzle. Richard could see the joy and pride in his son's face as he guided the story and made decisions for his character. Lila's ability to listen, adapt, improvise was helping Ethan develop confidence and imagination in a way that no book or game ever could. Finally, the game began to wind down. Lila peeked out from under the table, smiling at Richard. "He's amazing," she said softly. Richard nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and gratitude. He realized that Lila had done something extraordinary. Not just entertaining his son, but connecting with him on a level that mattered. Richard leaned back and reflected on what he had witnessed. Lila, a young waitress in a busy restaurant, had turned an ordinary lunch into a life lesson. She had shown him that true talent and kindness could exist anywhere, regardless of social status or wealth. She had reminded him of the importance of creativity, empathy, and human connection. And most importantly, she had given his son a moment of pure joy that Richard knew he would remember forever. By the time lunch was ending, Richard was filled with a mix of awe and curiosity. He wanted to know more about Lila, who she was, what her dreams were, and how someone so remarkable existed in a world that often overlooked ordinary people. He realized that their encounter today was no accident. It was a reminder that life was full of surprises, and sometimes the most meaningful connections came from the most unexpected places. As they prepared to leave, Richard quietly made a mental note. He would find a way to connect with Lila beyond this lunch. Didn't yet know how, but he knew one thing. She had earned his respect and admiration, and he wanted to see where her talent and spirit could go. Ethan, holding Lila's hand briefly to say goodbye, looked up at his father with a wide grin. "Can we play with her again next time?" he asked. Richard smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "I think we will," he said. And in that moment he knew that today's lunch had been far more than a meal. It had been a lesson, a memory, and a story of unexpected magic that would stay with them forever. After the exciting lunch and all the little surprises, Richard Sterling found himself thinking deeply about Lila. He had watched her handle every moment with grace, intelligence, and a playful energy that seemed rare in the world he lived in. Normally, his days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and decisions that involved millions of dollars. Yet here, at a simple restaurant, a young waitress had managed to teach him more about life, patience, and joy than any business lesson ever had. Ethan, still glowing from their secret games and playful adventures, tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we ask her about more games? She knows so many." Richard smiled softly. "I think she has work to do, buddy, but maybe we can talk to her a little before we leave." He called Lila over to their table. She approached with her usual warmth, balancing her professionalism with a friendly demeanor that immediately put Richard at ease. She knelt slightly to be at Ethan's level, and the boy excitedly explained the parts of the game they had played and how clever she had been with the story. Lila laughed softly, clearly pleased that her effort had made such a strong impression. Richard cleared his throat. "Lila, may I ask you something?" he said. "I've been watching you today, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. The way you handle everything, your creativity, your patience, your ability to connect with people, it's remarkable." Lila's cheeks flushed slightly, and she smiled. "Thank you, sir. I just like to make people happy, especially kids. It makes my day, too." Richard nodded, intrigued. "It shows. It's watching you today. It's clear you have talent that goes far beyond serving food. I'm curious. What are your dreams? What do you want to do with your life?" Lila hesitated, for a moment, glancing at Ethan, who was beaming with excitement. I've always wanted to do something creative, something that lets me work with people. I don't have a big plan yet. I just know I want to help people feel happy, like I did with Ethan today." Richard's curiosity grew. Here was someone so young, so humble, yet with a vision of kindness and creativity that was rare in a world obsessed with wealth and status. He realized that her work as a waitress was just the surface. Beneath it was a mind that could adapt, think creatively, and inspire. And more than that, a heart that genuinely cared about others. As they continued talking, Richard began to see how much he had underestimated people in ordinary jobs. He had spent most of his life surrounded by people trying to impress, to gain favor, or to climb social ladders. But Lila's approach was different. She didn't seek attention for herself. She sought to connect, to create joy, and to inspire confidence. Watching her interact with Ethan had been a revelation. Richard leaned back. Watching Lila move around the table, chatting gently with Ethan, she asked him about his favorite stories, encouraged his imagination, and made him feel like the center of the world. Richard realized how rare this was. In his life, few people had ever given him that kind of attention, that kind of focus, without expecting something in return. And now he was seeing it in someone else, someone much younger than him, someone whose life he had never thought would intersect with his own. Ethan, completely comfortable with Lila, whispered another idea for their game. Lila crouched slightly and smiled. "That sounds amazing, Ethan. Let's do it." She adapted immediately, using her voice and gestures to turn the table into a tiny world of adventure and excitement. Richard watched in admiration, the way she responded to Ethan's imagination, the way she encouraged him to explore ideas, and the way she made every moment feel special was extraordinary. Richard realized that Lila was teaching more than just fun and creativity. She was showing lessons in patience, empathy, and confidence. She had handled chaos, the spilled water, the knocked-over plate, the noisy restaurant without losing her composure or focus. She had shown Ethan how to respond to accidents with laughter instead of fear. And she had inspired him to think creatively, to trust his imagination. and to express himself without hesitation. Richard found himself reflecting on his own childhood. He remembered how he had often been pressured to succeed, to focus on results, and to maintain appearances. Playfulness, imagination, and simple joy had not been priorities in his early life. Yet here was Lila, showing him that these qualities were invaluable. They built confidence, resilience, and connection, the kinds of things that money could never buy. As the lunch began to wind down, Richard made a quiet decision. He wanted to give Lila an opportunity to grow, to explore her talents in a way that could make a real difference. He didn't want to offer money or charity. He wanted to give her a chance to use her skills and creativity in a bigger world. But he also didn't want to pressure her or make her feel uncomfortable. He needed to approach the situation carefully, showing respect and genuine interest in her dreams. Richard spoke softly. "Lila, I hope this doesn't sound strange, but I think you have incredible talent. I would like to help you explore it. If you're interested, I don't mean just money or gifts. I mean guidance, advice, and maybe an opportunity to grow in ways you might not have considered yet." Lila blinked in surprise, clearly taken aback. "Ooh, I don't know what to say," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. Richard smiled warmly. "You don't have to decide right now. Just know that if you're willing, I'd like to help you find your path. Something that lets you use your creativity, intelligence, and kindness to make a bigger difference." Ethan, sensing something important was happening, reached over and grabbed Lila's hand. "You should say yes. You're amazing," he whispered. Lila laughed softly, looking down at Ethan with affection. "Thank you, Ethan. You make it hard to say no," she said, her eyes meeting Richard's with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. Richard felt a sense of satisfaction. He knew he had sparked something important in her, a possibility, an opportunity, a way to see her own potential, and he realized that he had also learned a lot from her. Watching Lila had reminded him of the value of humility, kindness, and genuine connection. He had seen firsthand how one person could make a lasting impact on someone else simply by being themselves, as they finished their meal. Richard reflected on the lessons of the afternoon. He realized that success was not just about wealth or power. It was about the ability to see potential in people, to nurture creativity, and to value human connection. Lila had reminded him that real influence came from kindness and understanding, not from money or status. Ethan, still buzzing with excitement, looked up at his father. "Dad, can we play more games like this with her next time?" Richard nodded, smiling. "Absolutely, buddy. Hey, maybe we can even help her with some of her dreams, too." As they left the restaurant, Richard felt a new sense of purpose. He wanted to do more than just provide for his son financially. He wanted to help him experience the world fully, to meet people like Lila who could teach him valuable life lessons, and to show him that joy and creativity were just as important as success. Walking out into the sunny afternoon, Richard glanced at Lila, who waved goodbye with a bright smile. He knew this encounter was only the beginning. There was something special about her, something rare that he had to nurture. And more than that, he knew that today's lunch had changed him. He had learned to appreciate the unexpected, to value creativity and kindness, and to see people not for what they did, but for who they truly were. Ethan skipped ahead, holding his father's hand, talking excitedly about the story and all the new games he wanted to play. Richard laughed softly, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Lila had reminded him that life's most meaningful lessons often came from the simplest, most unexpected moments. As they drove away, Richard thought about the possibilities. Lila had talent, heart, and intelligence qualities that could take her far if given the right guidance. And he realized that he wanted to be the one to help her, not because he expected anything in return, but because he genuinely believed in her potential. He also knew that this experience would shape Ethan, teaching him that true connection and respect for others were more important than wealth or status. By the time they reached home, Richard felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Today had been more than a father-son lunch. It had been a lesson in life, kindness, creativity, and human connection. Lila had taught them all something invaluable, that joy could be found in unexpected places, that talent often lay hidden in the most ordinary roles, and that a genuine connection could change the way someone saw the world. Richard smiled to himself, thinking about the next steps. He didn't need a plan yet. He just knew one thing. He wanted to help Lila to see where her talent could go, and to continue teaching Ethan that the world was full of extraordinary people, even in the most ordinary places. And as Ethan chattered excitedly about the next secret story and the games he wanted to play with Lila, Richard realized that the afternoon had given him a new perspective on life, a new sense of appreciation for human creativity and connection, and a renewed understanding of what really mattered. After the lunch at the restaurant, Richard Sterling couldn't stop thinking about Lila. He had watched her interact with his son, Ethan, and seen qualities that impressed him more than anything money or power could. Lila was smart, playful, kind, and confident. She had handled chaos with calmness, made Ethan laugh endlessly, and had a natural ability to connect with people. Richard realized that her potential went far beyond waiting tables, and he felt an urge to help her explore it. That evening, Richard sat in his office at home, a quiet space lined with shelves of books and awards. He reflected on the lessons he had learned that afternoon. Most of his life, he had been focused on deals, profit margins, and appearances. But today, watching a young waitress play games with his son, he had been reminded that life's most valuable moments were about connection, kindness, and creativity. Ethan sat nearby, chattering about the games he had played with Lila. His little eyes sparkled as he recounted every twist and turn of their secret story. "Dad, she's the best. Can she come play at our house too?" Ethan asked, bouncing on the couch. Richard chuckled softly. "Maybe not at our house just yet, buddy. But I think we can help her do something really amazing. Something bigger than just games at the restaurant?" Ethan's curiosity grew. "Bigger? Like what?" Richard smiled mysteriously. "You'll see. I have an idea to help her explore her talent, her creativity, and her heart. I think she can do something wonderful if we give her the chance." The next day, Richard called Lila to the restaurant for a small private meeting. He wanted it to be informal, without the pressure of a boardroom or business office. When she arrived, she looked a little nervous, unsure why a billionaire would want to meet her outside of her normal work duties. Richard greeted her warmly, shaking her hand and inviting her to sit. "Lila," Richard began, "I've been thinking a lot about yesterday, watching you with Ethan, seeing how you handled everything with patience, creativity, and kindness. It made me realize that you have talent that can go far beyond this restaurant. I'd like to help you explore it if you're willing." Lila blinked, her eyes widening. "Me? Really?" I don't know what to say." Richard smiled gently. "You don't need to say anything right now. I just want to offer guidance, advice, and opportunities to grow. If you're interested, we can figure out a way for your creativity and talent to make a bigger impact." Lila hesitated, then smiled shyly. I think I'd like that. Always wanted to do something more, something where I can help people and use my imagination. I just didn't know how." Richard nodded. "That's why I'm here. I believe in giving people a chance to shine, and I think you have what it takes. You just need a little support and direction." Over the next few weeks, Richard introduced Lila to new opportunities. He connected her with people who worked in creative fields, helped her learn how to manage projects, and encouraged her to develop her ideas into something concrete. Lila proved to be quick to learn, ambitious, and hardworking. But what impressed Richard the most was her ability to remain kind, humble, and playful. Even as she began navigating new challenges, Ethan continued to be her biggest supporter. Every time she came over to work on ideas or try new projects, Ethan greeted her with excitement and cheer. "You're amazing, Lila. You can do anything," he would say. And Lila's face would light up with a bright smile, her confidence. Growing with each visit, Richard watched all of this with pride and fascination. He realized that his role wasn't to control or dictate what Lila did, but to provide guidance and opportunities. Her creativity and kindness were already strong. All she needed was someone to believe in her and open doors. Richard had done that once with his own business ventures, and now he was doing it for someone else, and it felt deeply satisfying. One afternoon, Richard invited Leela and Ethan to his office, which doubled as a mini creative studio. Wanted her to see how ideas could be turned into real projects. There were whiteboards with notes, samples of past work, and spaces for brainstorming. Richard encouraged her to imagine freely, to sketch out ideas, and to think about ways she could make a difference using her creativity. Leela looked around in awe. "This is amazing. Never thought I'd be able to do something like this," she said softly. Richard smiled. "It's not about being amazing at the start. It's about trying, learning, and growing. And from what I've seen, you have all the qualities you need to succeed." Ethan, as usual, was bouncing with excitement. "You're like a superhero. Lila, you can make amazing things happen." Over the next few months, Lila's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. She started working on creative projects, learning about design, communication, and storytelling. Richard continued to mentor her, offering guidance without taking over. He encouraged her to trust herself, to take risks, and to continue being kind and playful as Lila grew more confident. Richard saw the positive effect on Ethan. His son learned from her example that creativity, patience, and kindness were powerful tools. He saw someone using their talents to make a difference, and it inspired him to think bigger, be more imaginative, and approach life with curiosity. Richard realized that Lila's influence extended far beyond the projects she was working on. She was shaping Ethan's view of the world one evening. Richard invited Lila and Ethan to his mansion for a small celebration. He wanted to acknowledge her progress and encourage her to keep pursuing her dreams. The evening was filled with laughter, games, and stories. Leela shared some of the projects she had been working on, and Richard offered feedback and support. Ethan watched, proudly clapping and cheering. "You've come so far, Lila," Richard said warmly, "and this is just the beginning. Keep believing in yourself and don't be afraid to dream big." Lila smiled, feeling both proud and grateful. "Thank you, sir. I never imagined someone would believe in me like this. I promise I won't waste the opportunity." Richard nodded. "Don't doubt that for a second. You have the talent, the heart, and the determination. Keep going, and you'll accomplish amazing things." In the months that followed, Lila's creative projects began to gain recognition. People noticed her originality, kindness, and ability to engage others. Richard continued to mentor her, but he also allowed her the space to grow independently. Lila's confidence soared, and she never lost her playful, warm nature. She remained the same person who had crawled under the table to play with Ethan, bringing joy and laughter wherever she went. Richard often reflected on the journey. He realized that his meeting with Leela had changed him as much as it had changed her. He had learned to appreciate the unexpected, to value creativity and kindness, and to see people for who they truly were rather than their social status or job title. He had learned that life's most meaningful connections often came from the most unlikely places, and that giving someone a chance could have far-reaching effects. Ethan, inspired by Lila's courage and creativity, continued to grow. In confidence and imagination, he began thinking of his own ideas, telling stories and approaching challenges with curiosity. Richard was proud to see his son learning important lessons about kindness, creativity, and resilience, not from books or teachers, but from real life experiences and the example of someone like Lila. One afternoon, Lila visited Richard and Ethan to share a new project she had been working on. She had designed an interactive storytelling experience for children, inspired by the games she had played with Ethan under the restaurant table. Richard was amazed by her ingenuity. Ethan was thrilled to see his own ideas reflected in the project. "You've really outdone yourself?" Lila, Richard said, genuinely impressed. "This is exactly the kind of creativity and heart that I can make a difference in the world." Leela blushed slightly. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance and Ethan's inspiration. He's the best co-creator ever." Richard smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that the connection between Lila and Ethan had created something magical. It wasn't just about one person helping another. It was about how people could inspire and support each other to grow, create, and make a positive impact. As time went on, Richard continued to watch Leela thrive. She had transformed from a playful, imaginative waitress into a confident young woman, making a difference with her creativity and kindness. And yet she had never lost the qualities that had first impressed him: her warmth, humility, and genuine love for helping others. Richard often thought back to that first lunch, the moment when Lila had crawled under the table to play a game. With his son, he realized that life was full of moments like that, expected, magical, and full of lessons. And he felt grateful that he had recognized her potential and given her a chance. Ethan, now more imaginative and confident than ever, continued to enjoy games and adventures with Leela. Their bond remained strong, and Richard knew that the lessons his son had learned from her would stay with him for life. He had witnessed firsthand the power of creativity, empathy, and human connection, and he had been reminded that true wealth was not measured in money, but in the people who inspire us and the moments that shape us. In the end, Richard understood that helping Leela had been about more than just mentorship. It had been about recognizing talent, valuing kindness, and fostering dreams. And for Lila, it had been a life-changing opportunity, showing her that her skills, heart, and creativity could truly make a difference. Together, they had all learned something priceless: that extraordinary things could happen when people believed in each other, supported each other, and embraced the joy and magic in everyday moments. And so, the billionaire father, his imaginative son, and the remarkable young waitress continued their journey, creating memories, inspiring one another, and showing that life's most meaningful moments often came from the most unexpected places.